The Do It Right lesson plans, written by a teacher for teachers. There's a right way of doing anything, even if it be to boil an egg. Ralph Waldo Emerson, 1803 to 1882. Well, this quote, or these words of Ralph Waldo Emerson, certainly apply to the basic skills of expository writing. There is, indeed, an effective way of approaching expository writing. And once it's understood, you know what? It is as easy as boiling an egg. Hi, my name is Mike Foley, and I want to welcome you to the Do It Right Expository Writing Basic Skills Series for expository writing. Graded for teachers by a teacher who has over 40 years teaching English and writing at the junior high, senior high, and college levels. Before I go any further, I'd like to say that I think teaching is indeed probably the greatest profession. It's a profession where you're daily shaping youthful minds. You're instilling values, you're teaching character, all the while that you're teaching content and skills. And that's another facet of it. You're actually providing skills for the students' futures. And then finally, you're helping students live full and productive lives. And when you put all of that together, that's an amazing assignment. But that's teaching. And so at this time, before we really get started here, I would say thank you to you. Thank you for teaching. And now, having said that, we can move ahead here. But this short introductory video presentation is intended to provide some useful background information and context about the philosophy and practical application underlying the Do It Right Basic series of expository writing lessons. As you can see, the Do It Right series consists of a dozen separate lessons. Those lessons can be used in any order. They don't have to be in the order in which they're presented or listed. They can be presented or taught in any order. The format for each lesson is identical for continuity. Every lesson provides detailed instruction related to a very specific writing skill. The basic premise is that each lesson should focus on only one very specific skill and not be crowded and cluttered with trying to teach too many multiple facets of writing at the same time. When you do that, if you're teaching the skill of narration, for example, and you're busy pointing out grammatical things and all sorts of things at the same time, you have 8-10 things there, what happens is the skill of narration gets buried in all of that clutter. And the end result is confusion rather than learning. So here in the Do It Right program, we focus on a very specific skill, and that's the major focus. As we go along, we may say, okay, in addition to that, you should check that this is an incomplete sentence here, you need this part, you have a spelling error here. But again, remember, this is narration, so we focus on that one. For every lesson, we have the same parts. Every lesson begins with instruction on the very specific writing skill. There's instruction on what the skill is and how to use it. That instruction is followed by a writing model. The model demonstrates that skill. It gives the student an example. And we all know that the greatest musicians, the greatest painters, artists, learned about their particular skill, their area of expertise, and then they studied the masters. If you wanted to be a writer, one of the best things you can do is read. You could be a voracious reader, and you read Hemingway and Faulkner and Stephen Crane, the writers, and then you imitate their style for a while, and then eventually, again, your personal style evolves from that. After the writing model, there's a critique of the model. And that critique highlights the most important aspects of that skill. And it may go back and say, all right, in this writing model, we have these 4 very important parts, or 5 very important parts. First, the beginning. Let's look at the beginning. It says this, and so forth, and so forth. Beyond that, we talked about use of details. And look here, let's go back and circle the details. We have one here, we have one here, we have one here, and so forth. So it goes through that way, and it points out the important parts of the skill that are demonstrated in the model. After the critique, there's a quiz on the writing skill. That quiz asks very straightforward questions. Nothing tricky about it, just comes back and says 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever it is, and asks them questions. This provides measurement of learning for the student. After the quiz, immediately following, there's an answer key, and that provides immediate feedback. So they have the quiz, and rather than waiting 2 days, 3 days, 4 days to get it back, the answer key is right there. So they can get immediate feedback, so optimum learning can happen. After the answer key, there's a writing assignment. That writing assignment uses that specific writing skill for the lesson. This allows students to apply what has been learned. So you have application of the skill. Then after the writing assignment, there's a critique. That critique provides a checklist for that completed writing assignment. So that, again, the student gets immediate feedback, and it provides measurement of learning. It says, okay, how well did we do? So it asks their critique. We'll go back and ask the student, do you have a good beginning? Have you done this and have you done this? Have you provided significant details? Go back and circle those details. How many did you have? And so forth. So there's a critique checklist. And then finally, every lesson ends with a summary. The lesson summary goes back and says, okay, now that we've done all this, what have we learned here in this lesson? Well, we learned this, and then we learned this, and then we learned this about narration, and finally, we learned this. So in this part, with the lesson summary, what we do is we tell them what we told them, or what we taught them. You'll notice now as we go ahead that the Do It Right program includes PowerPoint presentations. The lessons are organized, constructed, and formatted exactly the way I would use them to teach students, including the slide notes at the bottom, which are visible only to you, the teacher, the presenter. So you'll see at the bottom of every slide, again, visible to only you, the teacher, there are notes for you there, some guide notes. These slide notes provide, they're called slide notes, these provide a guide or tips and hints for each slide in the lesson. So as the teacher, you determine the pace of each lesson and how many slides to cover in a single session. You determine how much time you'll spend on each slide. So you might have one slide where you spend 3 minutes. You may have another where you spend 15 minutes, depending on the content, the amount of information on the slide, and also on the discussion and the questions and so forth for that particular slide. As a suggestion, you may also want to provide students with a printed handout of the slides in order to take handwritten notes during the presentation. That provides a guide for them. And then you can always highlight important points by saying something like, now this is a key, this is very important, so write this down, make a note of it. So let's go back now for a moment and talk about the slide notes that are provided for you, the teacher. You'll see that there are 3 headings in the slide notes. One is question. When you see that word, that means this heading precedes a question or questions that are to be asked of the students. And then the other heading would be consider. The consider heading precedes comments and information that enhance and embellish the topic and in many cases actually lead to questions and discussion. And finally, sometimes, on occasion, you'll see a heading that says teaching prop. This heading suggests that you, the teacher, use a visual aid to demonstrate an important part of the lesson. You may be asked to bring in a newspaper or to bring in a tennis racket or something. So it's a visual aid. Those are the slide notes. You'll also notice now as you get into these that the Do It Right program utilizes the Socratic teaching method. And that reminds me of saying of the following words, I cannot teach anybody anything. I can only make them think. Socrates, 469 to 399 BC. Wow, long time ago. But a lot of wisdom. As teachers, that's what we're all about. We're teaching our students to think for themselves. We're giving them content, sure. We're teaching them content. We're teaching them skills. But one of the skills, a very, very important skill we're teaching them is how to think. So when using these lessons, I like to use the Socratic teaching method for both the question and consider headings of the slide notes. And when using the Socratic question-answer method, I always try to adhere to the following. First, of course, ask questions. And we all know that's what the Socratic method is. It's question and answer. So asking questions. When you ask questions, this makes your lessons participatory and allows the students to become involved in their learning. Rather than just pour forth the information and have them pour it back on the answer sheet for you, you're asking them questions and you're leading them into the lesson and through the lesson. So they participate, they become involved, they have responsibility in it. And the second thing is, and this is related definitely to the first here, is encourage students to become active rather than passive learners. They are active. They're asking questions. They're answering questions, and we all know this is the most effective and valuable learning. And the third bullet, if students don't respond, rephrase the question. If you ask a question, you don't see a hand go up or anything like that, rather than answer the question, think for a minute and rephrase the question. Turn it around, ask it in a different way. And that leads us to the fourth, again, another related point is, as the teacher, be patient. We all, as teachers, there are times we tend to become a little anxious, and then we answer our own questions. So don't become anxious and answer the question yourself if there's not an immediate response. Rather, ask the question, allow some quiet time for students to reflect and think about the question. You've got 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 30 seconds. Allow them some quiet time. Allow them to think about it and process it. Now the next is, if students come up with a partial answer, continue moving them ahead by asking other questions that will lead to the complete answer. So if you say, what is 3 times 3? And a student says 10, and you're looking for 9, don't say, no, you're wrong, but say, you know what, you're very close. But what about this? What about that? So you lead them to the correct answer. Again, these are also related. They overlap just a tad. And then don't allow students to intimidate classmates by laughing or making demeaning comments. If someone, a student answers a question or asks a question, don't allow students to intimidate that person. I call that academic intimidation. Remember that while we are teaching content and how to think, a sidebar or a bonus is we're also teaching students to respect the opinions of others. Someone says, I think this is what causes such and such. Another student might disagree, but they have to say, well, doesn't mean you're wrong, but I disagree because I think this. I respect your opinion. But, so teach students to respect the opinions of others. And then another thing, when you're using the Socratic method, and this is a very good lesson for the students, remember that one question can have several different correct answers. You could have one question and have 3 answers that are all correct. And it's important that we realize that as teachers, and also that the students realize that. And again, that's an important thing to learn. And then finally, allow students to respond by asking their own questions of you and of their peers. You ask them a question, they say, well, I think this, but you know what about this? They may direct it at you, or they may direct it at a classmate, and also you can direct it. You say, what about this? And they say, well, here's my thought, and then they come back and say to you, but what about this? You might say as the teacher, that's a good question. Well, what do we think about that? How would we answer that question? That's the tremendous value and benefit in using the Socratic method. So now that brings us to our final thought before we move ahead to teaching the actual lesson. Begin at the beginning, the king said gravely, and go on till you come to the end, then stop. Lewis Carroll, 1832 to 1898. Well, Lewis Carroll offers us some good advice. We've now come to the end of this video, and it's time to stop. But now we move on to the writing lesson. So let's roll up our sleeves and let's get started.